Today is day 155. It's Friday, and we are still working on Tales of a Fourth Grade Nothing, but we are actually nearing the end of Tales of a Fourth Grade Nothing. One of my favorite things about this story is how funny it is, so that's what we're going to talk about today. Because today is our second to last chapter, and we haven't had a chance to really talk about how funny this story is. So, sorry, if you go back, I'll go back. This is where your video is posted. Like I said, you're already in the video if you're listening to this, so you don't have to worry about that. So now you can just kind of listen, and then if you want to go back and look at any of this, you can. So today what we're going to do is summarize how the author made the chapter humorous. So we're going to be looking at different events in the story and how the author made them funny. Humorous and funny mean the same thing. So anytime you hear me say the word humorous, think of the word funny. If you ever hear like somebody say sense of humor, that means like that they're funny too. So we're going to summarize the elements the author used to make the story humorous. So summarize, to retell the event in a story in your own words. And we're going to do that in 1 to 3 sentences every time. Anytime we hear the word summarize, we always want to make sure we cut it down to 1 to 3 sentences. Again, remember humorous means funny. And like I said, Tales of a Fourth Grade Nothing is a funny book. So there are all sorts of funny events happening in the story. And in this chapter, I think there are several funny events. So how can we tell if an author is making the story humorous? So we can look at the character dialogue. What the characters say to each other sometimes makes the story funny. We can look at the character thoughts. Specifically in this story, sometimes Peter's thoughts make the story funny. He might think something about Fudge that makes the story funny. Character actions, what the characters do. Fudge has a lot of character actions that make this story funny. He does a lot of funny things. And then finally, descriptive language, when the author tells part of the story with lots of detail. I'll give you an example of this today so you can see what I mean by this. So, our steps. First, we're going to read the story. We're going to notice the parts of the story that make us laugh or that we think is funny. Sometimes we don't actually laugh out loud, but we know or we think that that part of the story was funny. Ask yourself, what did the author do to make it funny? This is where you're going to go back up here. Which part of these things, what one of these 4 things did the author do to make the story funny? And then finally, you're going to explain the event in 1 to 3 sentences. So we're going to start reading, and when I stop, I'll do an example, and then you'll get to do some on your own later. Chapter 9, Just Another Rainy Day. The next day it rained. My father asked me how I'd like to go to the movies. Just me? I asked. No, all 3 of us, he said. Fudge is very young to go, I said. Don't you think? Maybe, but I can't think of anything else to do with him, and that will take up a few hours. You could give him some socks, I suggested. You know he loves to play with your socks. Socks won't last the whole afternoon, my father said. That's why I thought of the movies. What'll we see, Dad? My father checked his New York magazine. A Bear's Life is playing in the neighborhood. How does that sound? What's it about? I asked. A Bear's Life, I guess, my father said. It's rated G. I was thinking of a good Western with lots of actions, or else a picture rated R where you can't get in unless you're under 17, unless you're with your parents. But my father made up his mind. A Bear's Life it was. I suggested that my father get Fudge cleaned up, because by then he was looking kind of messy. I don't think my father even put him into his pajamas last night. He's been wearing the same polo shirt ever since my mother left yesterday morning. By 1 o'clock, we were ready to go. All 3 of us wore our raincoats and rubbers, and my father took his big black umbrella. One thing about New York, it's hard to get a cab when it's raining. But the movie theater wasn't very far. My father said the walk would do us all good. There were a lot of puddles. It was really pouring. I like to walk in the rain, especially if it isn't too cold out. It feels nice when it wets your face. I jumped over the puddles. My father avoided them too, but not Fudge. He jumped right into every one and splashed around like a little duck. By the time we got to the movie theater, the bottoms of his pants were soaked. My father took him into the men's room. He stuffed a bunch of paper towels up each pant leg so Fudge wouldn't have to sit around all wet. At first, Fudge complained, but when my father brought him a big box of popcorn, he forgot all about his stuffed pants. Right after we got settled in our seats, a big boy sat in front of Fudge, so he had to change seats with my father. Now he was in the aisle, I was in the middle, and my father was on the other side. Pause here. So I realized I actually just laughed right there, so I want to go to my example. So for today, my example is right here. So it says reread this section of the story. Now this is a short section. Usually it's a little bit longer because there's lots of dialogue, but this is just a shorter paragraph, and we're going to talk about why I chose this one. So reread it. I jumped over the puddles. My father avoided them too, but not Fudge. He jumped right into every one and splashed around like a little duck. By the time we got to the movie theater, the bottoms of his pants were soaked. My father took him to the men's room, and he stuffed a bunch of paper towels up each leg so Fudge wouldn't have to sit around all wet. At first, Fudge complained, but when my father brought him a big box of popcorn, he forgot about his stuffed pants. So right there, to me, well, first let's go through these steps. So read the story. We just reread it. Notice the event that made us laugh. So this is the event that made me laugh. So I put it on here for this example. Now I want to ask yourself, what did the author do to make this funny? Character dialogue always has quotation marks around it. There's no character dialogue in this part, so I know it's not two characters talking to each other. Character thoughts, what the character is thinking. This isn't showing me his inner thoughts. This is just showing me that he's explaining what's happening. So right now, Peter is just explaining what happened in the story, so it's not his thoughts. Character actions, kind of, because the actions of his father and of Fudge are pretty funny, right? But what I think's really funny is how it was described. So they say he jumped into everyone and splashed around like a little duck. His pants were soaked. And then this is the part that I thought was funny. My father took him into the men's room, and he stuffed a bunch of paper towels up each part of his leg so he wouldn't have to sit around all wet. So I'm imagining that because that was very descriptive to me. I'm imagining his dad stuffing all the paper towels up his legs and then Fudge walking around with paper towels in his pants. And to me, that's really funny, and that's descriptive language. So I would click descriptive language. The author described an event in detail. So then for my summary, I'm going to explain what happened that was funny. So what I'm going to say is in this part of the story, so Fudge jumped in puddles on their way to the movie theater. So his pants were soaked. So that's my sentence number one. I'm explaining what he did. Now, the funny part that I think is how his dad fixed the problem. Peter's dad fixed the problem by stuffing his pants with a lot of paper towel. Then I might say something like Fudge sat in the movies with his pants stuffed with paper towels. Something like that. So this isn't exactly what I wrote on the example because I already did the example. So just, this is a really good example. This is a really good example of 1 to 3 sentences. So I didn't copy the exact words from the paragraph because I'm summarizing this in my own words. Sorry, that was what I was trying to say before. So now we're summarizing this part in our own words, okay? So you want to make sure that you don't copy from the paragraph, but that you still explain what happened on your own. All right, so we're going to get back to reading, and then let's see what happens. So now they're sitting in the movie theater. Let's see what happens. When the lights dimmed, Fudge said, "Oh, dark." I told him, "Be quiet. You can't talk in the movies." "Okay, Peter," he said. That's when he started throwing his popcorn. At first I didn't notice, but I wondered why the people in front of us were turning around every second. Then I heard Fudge whisper, "Pow, pow, pow," and I saw him throw a handful of popcorn. I poked my father. "He's throwing his popcorn," I whispered. My father reached across me and tapped Fudge on the leg. "If you throw one more piece, I'm going to take it away from you." "No throw," Fudge said very loud. "Shh," the people in front of us said. "Shh," Fudge said back to them. "You see," I told my father, "he's too young for the movies. He doesn't understand." But from the moment the first bear came on screen, Fudge sat still and watched. And after a while, I forgot about him and concentrated on the movie. It was much better than I thought it would be. It showed all those bear cubs and how they live. I'm not sure when I realized Fudge was gone. I guess it was when I turned to ask him if he had any popcorn left. I had already finished mine and I was still hungry. I was really surprised to see he wasn't there. I mean, one minute he was sitting right next to me, and the next minute he was gone. "Hey, Dad," I whispered to my father. "He's gone." "What?" my father said. "Fudge isn't in his seat." My father looked over. "Where did he go?" "I don't know. I just noticed he was gone." "Let me out, Peter. I'll find him." "Should I come too?" I asked. "No, you can sit here and watch the rest of the picture. He's probably wandering around the candy counter." I stood up to let my father out. I wondered what my mother would think if she knew Fudge was lost in the movies. Where do you think Fudge is? Let's find out. A few minutes later, the picture stopped right in the middle of the scene. The soundtrack trailed off like a broken record. All the lights came on. The audience let out a groan. Some kids called, "Boo! Boo!" Then my father and two ushers and a man in a suit came over to me. "He was sitting right here," my father told them, pointing to the empty seat on the aisle. "Well," the man in the suit said, "we've checked the restrooms and the office. He's not behind the candy counter. We'll have to search the theater." He cupped his hands around his mouth and shouted, "Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention, please? We'll continue with the film in one moment. But first, we have to find a 3-year-old boy answering to the name of Fudge." Some people laughed when the man said his name. I guess Fudge does sound funny. If you're not used to it, I thought. Maybe he's been kidnapped. Would my mother be mad? That crazy kid. You can't even take him to the movies. Then I thought, who'd want to kidnap him anyway? "What should I do, Dad?" I said. "Why don't you walk up and down the aisle and call him, Peter?" "Okay," I said. "Here, Fudge," I called, starting down the aisle. I sounded like I was calling a dog. "Come on out, Fudge." When I got down to the first row and called, "Here, Fudge," he popped out at me. He scared me so bad I yelled, "Ooh!" "Hi, Peter," he said. "Hey, I found him," I called. I found him. Here he is." Then I turned to my brother. "You dope. What are you doing down here? And why are you sitting on the floor?" "Wanted to touch the bears," Fudge said. "But bears are all gone." He spread out his arms and said, "All gone," again. My father and the ushers and a man in a suit ran to us. "Fudge," my father said, scooping him up. "Are you all right?" "He wanted to pet the bears," I said. "Can you beat that?" "Well, I guess we can continue the picture now," the man in the suit said. He cupped his hands around his mouth again. "Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Our young man has been found safe and sound. Now we return to the conclusion of A Bear's Life." My father carried Fudge back to our seats. He held him in his lap for the rest of the show. I guess he wasn't taking any more chances. Later, when we got home, my father explained to Fudge that movies are like TV. It's just a picture. There's nothing much to touch. So pause there. So that whole section has several funny events, and that's actually where you're going to be doing your work for today, is on that section. So right now, I just want you to be thinking about, before we move on, what was something you thought that was funny in that section? We're not going to talk about it because that's going to be your work for today. All right. Now, there is some funny stuff in this section too, so pay attention here, but I want you to think about the top part for our question later. Fudge listened, but I don't know whether he believed my father. I had the feeling he still thought those bears were in the theater somewhere. I made up my mind that I would never take my little brother to the movies. Never. At least not until he was 9 or 10. My father said he was going to cook us up something special for dinner to celebrate finding Fudge in the movies. I thought that was really strange because, as far as I know, my father can't cook anything. He doesn't even know where my mother keeps the peanut butter, the dishes, or the pots and pans. Lucky for him, I was there to show him. "What are you going to cook, Dad?" "A super-duper omelet," he said. "Omelet? I'm not sure me and Fudge like omelets." "You'll like this one," my father said, humming as he gathered his ingredients together. "Get me one big frying pan, Peter." "Okay," I said. I gave it to him. He melted some butter in it. "What's going in the super-duper omelet?" I asked while Fudge sat on the floor, banging 2 pot covers together. "Well, the eggs, of course," my father said. "Omelets are made of eggs." "And what else?" I asked. "Oh, I think I'll make a mushroom omelet." "Eggs and mushrooms?" I said. Yes, you'll love it. I'm not so sure. You'll see, Peter, my father said. I set up the table while my father cooked. I even put Fudge in his booster seat chair. When the omelet was done, my father brought it to us. He was still humming. That's some big omelet, I said when I saw it. It filled up the whole frying pan. How many eggs did you use? About a dozen, my father said. Mom only cooks one at a time, I told him. When you taste this, you'll know why I use them all up. You mean it's that good? I asked. Go on, my father said as he served it to me. Taste it. I took a bite. It was awful. The worst thing I'd ever ate in my life. But my father was standing there, grinning at me. I didn't want to hurt his feelings. Well, he said. It's nice, I told him, swallowing a chunk whole. I washed it down with a glass of milk. You see, your mother ought to experiment more. Then you'd learn to eat a lot of different things. I don't think Mom ever made me an omelet, or a mushroom omelet, I said. My father put some on Fudge's plate, and then he served himself. Fudge shoved a lot into his mouth at once. I waited, figuring he'd choke on it. Instead, he said, Oh, good. My father beamed. Fudge wasn't smart enough to fool my father, so he must have really liked it. But a kid that can eat flowers and swallow teeth wouldn't know much about omelets anyway. Then my father sat down and tasted his super-duper concoction. He not only choked on it, he spit it out. Oh no, he said. This is awful. Something went wrong. Maybe the eggs are rotten. Mom just bought them on Thursday, I said. Maybe it's the mushrooms then, my father said. Maybe it's how you cooked it, I suggested. My father jumped up from the table and threw the mushroom omelet in the garbage. Fudge started to cry. Want more, more. No, my father told him. It wasn't any good. Fudge screamed. Eat it or wear it. Eat it or wear it. He flung his spoon across the room. It hit my mother's favorite plant. The dirt spilled all over the kitchen floor. Now you stop that, my father yelled at Fudge. I'm going to make us nice peanut butter sandwiches. Then you're going to have a bath. Your mommy's coming home tomorrow, and we're going to show her how well Daddy managed all by himself. Peter, where does your mother hide the peanut butter? After supper, my father bathed Fudge. The only thing he decided not to do were the dishes. He stacked them in the sink and left them for my mother. On Sunday afternoon, we drove out to the airport to meet my mother's plane. On the way there, my father said that wouldn't it be fun if we kept all things we did over the weekend a secret, just between the three of us, kind of a man secret. I agreed not to say a word, and my mother was so glad to see us she didn't even mention the dirty dishes in the sink. 6 weeks later, we were watching TV one night when the new Toddlebite commercial came on. That's me, Fudge said. My mother looked up from the book she was reading. He does look like you, Fudge, but that's not really you. Oh, yes, Fudge said. That's me, see? My mother squinted and looked harder. You know, Warren, she told my father, he really does look like Fudge. Then she laughed. Imagine another little boy like Fudgy. It's Fudge, all right, I said. It's Fudge, all right, my brother repeated. Why, we didn't tell you, my dear, my father said. We thought you'd like to be surprised, but that is Fudge. What? My mother said, like she couldn't believe it. You see, Mom, I began. Remember that weekend you went to visit Aunt Linda? Then I stopped and thought about all the things my mother didn't know. Like the puddles Fudge splashed in, and the paper towels up his pants, and how he wanted to touch the bears, and the mushroom omelet, and Mr. Vincent and his big cigar, and Janet and her goldfish crackers, and I looked at my father and I started to laugh. So did he. All right, that's where we're going to stop for today. So even in that section, some funny things happened with the mushroom omelet, with Fudge wanting the mushroom omelet, and with the Toddlebite commercial, with Fudge saying, eat it or wear it. Like, throughout this story, there are just tons of funny events. So today for your story, so this is just an example that I did with you already. Now, for your practice, you're going to reread this section. You're going to choose one event. So whatever event you choose, I want you just to highlight it, even though it won't stay, just highlight it and ask yourself these questions. Is the author using character dialogue, character thoughts, character actions, or descriptive language? choose your answer. And then that same section, I want you to explain what you thought was funny about it. And then you'll press submit and you'll be done. On Monday, we will finish our story and then we will start a new one next week. Have a good weekend. Bye.